The night my apartment split open felt like the universe was peeling away the last illusion I had left. One moment I was asleep, and the next I was running barefoot into the cold hallway, the building groaning as if it were finally tired of holding itself together. I thought losing my home would be the worst part, until the person I trusted most looked me in the eye and told me I was useless. That was the blow that cracked something deeper than concrete. And yet, that moment became the doorway to a truth I never saw coming. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you are watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we are truly grateful to have you here. If you have not already, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let us get started. I am Grace Alvarez, and at 61 years old, my mornings have become rituals that keep me stitched together. Each day begins before the sun rises over the suburbs of Philadelphia. I shuffle into my small kitchen, place my old aluminum coffee filter over a chipped mug, and wait for the slow drip of dark coffee that smells richer than anything else I own. The apartment is quiet at that hour, a kind of quiet that presses against the chest. Some people find silence peaceful. For me, it feels like a reminder that the world has grown very distant. My building shows its age long before you step into my unit. The hallway always carries the faint scent of bleach and something tired beneath it. The elevator groans as if annoyed at being asked to do its job. Paint curls away from the walls like paper left too close to a fire. Inside my apartment, things are worn but cared for. Wooden frames hold photographs of years that feel impossibly far away. The tablecloth is one I stitched myself decades ago, and the shelves bow under the weight of old albums and paperback novels. My sanctuary is the narrow balcony. The railing is rusted, the concrete chipped, but the little patch of green I keep alive there means everything. Mint, rosemary, a few wildflowers that sprouted from the soil I reused each season. Every morning I water them, watching the city stir below. Cars hum in the distance, and the wind carries the smell of autumn leaves. It is the kind of peace that feels almost delicate, as if one wrong breath could make it unravel. My daughter, Lena Parker, lives only 20 minutes away, but it might as well be another continent. Our conversations are measured and polite, always stopping just short of warmth. She is 35 now, a mother of two, running a small online bakery with her husband, Eric. She has built a life she guards fiercely, and I stay on the edges of it like a guest who never quite fits into the picture. I know she still carries the resentment of a childhood where I was more absent than present. Years spent working for the Carter family as a housekeeper and nanny gave her a roof and schooling, but took from her the softness of having a mother at home. Samuel Carter, the child I cared for all those years, is a memory I hold with tenderness. He had been small and fragile once, always reaching for me with sticky fingers. I watched him grow, succeed, and become someone extraordinary. But after I retired, I let the distance grow. I refused to be a burden or a reminder of a past I thought he no longer needed. My pension is small, my savings smaller. I live modestly, choosing careful groceries and counting each bill before paying it. Yet somehow the apartment has always felt stable, even when everything else felt temporary. Or at least it used to. Lately, the building has started to whisper its warnings. A vibration in the railing, a crack on the hallway floor. The sound of construction echoes from the lower level, a constant clang that makes the walls tremble. This morning, as I watered my rosemary, I felt the slightest shiver under my feet, just enough to make me pause. I told myself it was nothing. Buildings grow old the way people do. They groan, settle, shift. But as I moved the pot back into place, a sharp sound sliced through the quiet. A deep cracking noise from the wall beside the balcony door. I set my coffee down, heart tightening, and stepped closer. A long fracture crept down the plaster, jagged and new. I stared at it, unable to shake the sudden feeling that my small, fragile world had begun to split open right in front of me. If you are still watching and this moment pulled you in, comment number 1 below so I know you are with me. Now, let us move on to Chapter 2. Things are about to shift in a way no one sees coming. The knock came so early that I thought I was dreaming. It was sharp and deliberate, the kind that does not go away until someone answers. When I opened the door, a city inspector stood there with 2 workers behind him, their reflective vests bright in the dim hallway. He did not smile. He simply handed me a paper and moved on to the next apartment. I stared at the bold red words printed across the top. Condemned, repair required, unsafe structure. For a long moment, I could not breathe. The hallway around me seemed to tilt, its familiar decay suddenly sinister. I stepped out to watch as the inspector taped the same notice on every door, his motions quick and practiced, as if he had done this many times before. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, murmuring in low voices. I felt their fear mixing with my own, settling into my bones. I returned inside with a heaviness I had not felt in years. My eyes went straight to the crack near the balcony door. It had grown longer overnight, stretching like a thin, jagged vein down the plaster. The inspector's words echoed in my mind, even though he had spoken them to someone else. Years of poor maintenance, structural instability, immediate evacuation recommended. My apartment, my only safe corner in the world, was no longer safe at all. Fear comes differently when you are older. It is sharper, heavier. There is less time to rebuild, less strength to start again. I stood in the middle of my small living room and felt something close to panic claw at me. Where would I go? What could I afford? I did not let myself stay in that spiral too long. I reached for my phone. Calling my daughter always required a moment of preparation. I had to brace myself, steady my voice, remind myself that hope was not the same as expectation. After staring at her name on the screen for several seconds, I pressed the call button. The ringing felt endless before she finally answered, sounding tired and irritated. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, but her silence on the other end was louder than anything I said. I heard Eric's voice in the background, impatient and disapproving. When she finally responded, her words landed like cold stones. "We cannot take this on." That was all she said before ending the call. The humiliation burned hotter than fear. Still, I told myself that maybe seeing her face to face would change something. Maybe compassion needed proximity. I grabbed a tote bag and filled it with the essentials: a change of clothes, medication, and the small album I always took with me. The sky was gray and heavy as I drove, matching the weight in my chest. The neighborhood where Lena lived was quiet and orderly, everything trimmed, repaired, and freshly painted. I felt out of place stepping onto her porch. Eric opened the door, his expression stiff and guarded. He did not invite me in. I tried to speak, but he cut me off quickly. The few words he gave me were clipped and cold. I saw Lena behind him, her eyes avoiding mine, her face tight with discomfort rather than concern. There was nothing left to say. When the door clicked shut, I felt the sound move through me like a judgment. I walked back to my key, every step heavier than the last. Sitting behind the wheel, I looked at their house through the blur of my own breath on the glass and realized I had nowhere to go. The crack in my wall was only the beginning. Something deeper had started to fracture, and I could not tell if anything could hold me together now. If you are still watching and the tension is starting to unfold for you, comment number 2 below to let me know you are following closely. Now, let us move on to chapter 3, where the first cracks turn into a real break. The first night in my car felt longer than any night I could remember. I had parked behind a grocery store where the lights stayed on until dawn, hoping the brightness would make me feel less alone. Instead, it only highlighted the cold. I curled myself against the seat, trying to find a position that did not strain my back, but the stiffness came anyway. By morning, a thin film of my breath coated the inside of the windows. When I exhaled, the fog bloomed and faded, like a reminder of how small I had become in my own life. I stepped out slowly, wincing at the ache in my lower spine. The air was sharp and smelled faintly of gasoline and wet pavement. Inside the gas station restroom, I splashed water on my face and watched the droplets sink into the lines I had earned through decades of work. The mirror was unkind, but I refused to look away. I bought a small stale pastry and the cheapest bottle of water, then returned to my car to think. Each quiet moment felt like a weight pressing on my chest. I called 2 old friends, women I had worked alongside during my years as a housekeeper. I needed only a few nights, a couch, even a spot on a floor. Both answered with gentleness, but gentleness did not change the reality. One lived with her daughter and grandchildren in a 2-bedroom apartment. The other was caring for a sick husband. I heard the strain in their voices as they apologized. I told them I understood, and I meant it. But when the calls ended, the silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush me. Later that afternoon, a notification lit up my phone. A neighbor from my old building had forwarded me a screenshot. Lena had posted a message on her social media account. Some parents never learn how to be parents. I learned the hard way. It was vague, but not vague enough. Beneath it were reactions, comments, supportive messages encouraging her for setting boundaries. As I read each line, something tightened in my chest. It was not simply the words. It was the knowledge that she felt them deeply enough to share with the world. I thought that was the end of the humiliation, but the day had more to give. Another message arrived, this time a link to a community forum. Someone had posted a video taken the day before. The title asked, "Would you turn away your own mother?" I watched myself standing on Lena's porch, watched Eric close the door, watched my shoulders drop as I walked back to my car. The clip was short, but brutal in its honesty. In the comments, people argued fiercely. Some defended Lena. Many condemned her. All of them discussed me as if I were an idea, not a person who still had nowhere to sleep that night. I sat in my car for a long while, holding the phone in my lap, staring at my own reflection in the dark screen. I did not recognize the woman I saw there. She looked deflated, almost transparent. I wanted to disappear, to shrink until the world no longer had room to notice me. Yet deep inside, something stirred, small, fragile, but persistent. A memory of a boy with bright eyes and a clumsy run. A boy who had once clung to me as if I were his whole world. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the old photo album. The pages smelled faintly of dust and time. I turned to a picture of Samuel Carter when he was 5, his smile wide and crooked, his arm wrapped around my neck. I traced his face with my thumb and felt something warm press against the sadness inside me. I whispered his name, not expecting courage to follow, but it did. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone and scrolled to the last number I had saved for him. I hesitated once, then twice, then forced myself to press the call button. The ringing felt endless, each tone slicing through the quiet car. Then a voice, warm, steady, familiar, filled my ear. The darkness around me shifted, just enough for hope to breathe again. If you are still watching and felt the sting of what just happened, comment number 3 below so I know you are still with me. Now, let us continue to chapter 4, where everything becomes even harder to ignore. Samuel's voice had barely faded from the phone before the quiet of the gas station folded around me again. He had spoken with a firmness I remembered from his teenage years, the same tone he used when he promised he would study hard or stop letting the neighborhood boys push him around. Only now it carried the confidence of a man who made life or death decisions for a living. He told me not to move, told me he was coming, told me I would not spend another night in my car. When the call ended, I stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel relief or shame. The minutes stretched painfully. I sat in the driver's seat with my fingers pressed together, trying to steady my breath. Part of me replayed every memory of raising him, the scraped knees, the fevers, the bedtime stories whispered in the dim glow of a nightlight. Part of me wondered if calling him had been wrong. Perhaps I had reached for a bond that existed only in my own heart. Perhaps he would arrive out of pity and regret it the moment he saw me. But then the quiet night shifted. Twin beams swept across the parking lot as 2 large black vehicles turned in, their engines low and smooth like something out of another world. They rolled to a stop in front of me, polished metal glinting under the streetlights. My breath caught. I could not imagine myself belonging anywhere near such a scene. The first door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, scanned the area, and then opened the rear door with a deliberate movement. Samuel emerged, taller than I remembered, composed in a way only years of discipline could create. Yet his face, when he saw me, cracked with emotion. He crossed the distance quickly, and before I could speak, his arms were around me. The sudden warmth of his embrace unraveled the tension that had gripped my spine for days. I felt small and exhausted in his hold, but for the first time in a long while, not alone. One of the security staff approached quietly, a man I did not recognize at first. When he spoke, his voice trembled slightly. He told me he remembered me from years ago, from afternoons when I picked Samuel up from school. He thanked me for what I had done. The unexpected recognition brought a tightness to my throat. It had been so long since anyone looked at me with something other than impatience or annoyance. Samuel guided me into the back seat of the vehicle, his movements careful, as though he feared I might break. Inside, the seats were warm, the air soft and clean. I caught my reflection in the dark window, hair tangled, clothes wrinkled, and tried not to shrink into myself. Samuel asked gentle questions about my belongings, my health, whether I had eaten. He listened without judgment, as if my answers mattered deeply. When we passed by the ruins of my building, I felt my stomach turn. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind. Walls leaned at strange angles, as though tired of standing. Samuel asked the driver to slow down. I saw workers picking through the debris, pulling out items that did not belong to them. The sight hollowed me. Samuel made quiet calls, promising action, promising to retrieve whatever could be saved. By the time we reached his temporary residence, a private suite used for emergencies, my body felt heavier than when the night began. The space inside was warm, with folded blankets and a soft light waiting. I stood in the center of the room, unsure how to exist in such comfort after nights spent curled in a car. Samuel told me to rest, that tomorrow we would take the next steps. When the door closed behind him, I showered slowly, letting the hot water rinse away the cold of the past days. Clean clothes waited on the counter. The bed, when I lowered myself onto it, seemed to hold me with gentle arms. For the first time since my apartment crumbled, I let my eyes close without fear. And as sleep pulled me under, one truth settled quietly inside me. Sometimes loyalty grows not from blood, but from the hands that once held you through the dark. If you are still watching and the story has you hooked, comment number 4 below so I know you are right here with me. Now, let us step into chapter 5 where the real storm finally hits. Morning settled into the suite with a quiet gentleness I had not felt in years. I woke slowly, wrapped in warmth, the sheets soft against my skin, and the air carrying the faint scent of fresh linen. For a moment, I did not remember where I was. The silence was too clean, too safe, and my body too rested. Then the events of the past days returned in pieces, and gratitude mingled with disbelief. I sat at the edge of the bed, letting the stillness wash over me, aware that safety could feel unfamiliar after so much fear. When I stepped into the small dining area, Samuel was already there, dressed impeccably, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up, and the expression on his face was the same one he wore as a child when he wanted to reassure me before a dentist appointment. Breakfast waited on the table, warm and neatly arranged. We ate in quiet comfort, but the silence carried intention. I could feel him preparing himself for something heavier. He finally set the tablet aside and explained the plan with calm confidence. He spoke of temporary housing options, legal steps regarding the collapsed building, and financial matters he intended to help me resolve. His words came with the steady certainty, as if these burdens were small in his hands. I felt both humbled and overwhelmed. No one had spoken about my life with such seriousness in a long time. Yet beneath the gratitude, a knot of worry tightened. Support always has a way of stirring guilt in those who learn to survive without asking. Then he said the words I feared most. He wanted to confront Lena and Eric. He believed the wound could not close until truth was spoken aloud, not hidden in silence. I tried to protest, tried to tell him that I did not want to make trouble or reopen old resentments, but he remained firm. He believed this confrontation was not for revenge, but for clarity. It was time, he insisted, for dignity to be returned. The drive to their neighborhood felt endless. The houses stood tall and similar, each with manicured lawns and carefully designed landscapes. It was the kind of place where people worked hard to appear perfect. When our vehicles turned onto the street, curtains fluttered and blinds shifted. The presence of luxury cars and security personnel drew immediate curiosity. I felt exposed, as though the entire neighborhood already knew what we had come for. When Eric finally opened the door, the confidence he usually carried faltered. He looked smaller, startled by the sight of Samuel and the suited men behind him. Lena appeared a moment later, her expression tightening into something between shock and defensiveness. I stood slightly behind Samuel, my hands clasped together, fighting the instinct to disappear. Samuel's voice began calm but carried a sharp clarity. He laid out every fact: the collapse, the rejection, the nights in my car, the cruel online posts. Each word landed heavy. My chest tightened hearing my own suffering recited so plainly, but part of me was relieved that someone finally spoke it without diminishing it. Neighbors gathered, stepping onto porches or sidewalks, some raising their phones to record. The air filled with whispers. The confrontation had become a public reckoning. Eric attempted weak explanations about routines, the children, obligations, but each excuse crumbled under Samuel's unwavering logic. The truth stood too solid to disguise. Lena's breaking point came when her voice trembled with long-held resentment. She accused me of loving the wrong child, of giving my time and affection to someone who was not hers. Her words were raw, torn from a place she had never dared expose. Hearing them felt like reopening a wound I had stitched together decades ago. Then an unexpected voice cut through the tension. A neighbor stepped forward, a woman I did not recognize. She admitted she had once seen Lena treat me with disrespect years earlier and had always regretted staying silent. The confession sent a visible shock through Lena and Eric, their carefully crafted image cracked in front of an entire audience. The moment felt like the top of a wave, powerful and unsteady. Lena's posture collapsed into fear, not remorse. Eric looked defeated. I felt no triumph, only a quiet loosening inside me, as though I had finally set down a heavy bag I had carried across too many years. Samuel ended the confrontation with finality. He guided me toward the waiting vehicle without looking back. The whispers followed us, mixing with the cool air. As I stepped inside, I realized something profound. I'd walked onto that porch carrying shame. I left it carrying a sliver of freedom, as if I were finally stepping out of a long, unlit hallway into a space where I could breathe again. The car ride after the confrontation felt suspended in a strange stillness. The world outside the tinted windows moved, but inside the air was heavy with everything that had just unraveled. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, feeling each heartbeat as if it were trying to remind me that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of being shaken by the people who once meant the most to me. Shame lingered, but so did an unexpected sense of clarity. For years, I had carried questions about why Lena resented me. Now the answers had been spoken aloud, sharp and painful, but undeniable. Samuel sat beside me, composed but thoughtful. When he finally broke the silence, he did so gently. He asked how I felt, not to demand an explanation, but to give me room to recognize my own feelings. It was harder than I expected. My emotions tangled together, hurt from hearing my daughter's bitterness, relief that the truth was no longer locked inside silence, exhaustion from carrying decades of guilt. I told him, in a few quiet words, that the confrontation had cut deeper than I imagined. He listened, letting the weight of my confession settle in the space between us. As the car approached the tall building where Samuel lived, he spoke about the necessity of facing old wounds. He said avoidance had only kept me tied to a past I could never repair alone. His voice held a calm certainty, the same tone he used when he guided anxious families in hospital waiting rooms. He reminded me that I had choices now, something I had almost forgotten was possible. For years, my life had revolved around Lena's disappointment, as though I owed her a childhood I could never return. When we stepped out of the car and entered the private elevator, the marble floors and quiet luxury felt almost unreal. I followed Samuel into the penthouse at Downtown, feeling both grateful and out of place. The space overlooked the city with wide windows that let in soft evening light. It was serene, controlled, and the opposite of the chaos I had lived through. Samuel motioned for me to sit in the living room. The city lights shimmered behind him, creating a quiet backdrop for a conversation that felt heavier than any I had faced in years. He told me, with deliberate care, that the next steps depended on what I wanted. He could help me secure housing, stability, and work if I wanted it. He could also step back if that felt better for me. He emphasized that my life did not need to be shaped by what Lena had said or done. For the first time, someone was placing my needs at the center rather than as an afterthought. I sat quietly, absorbing the truth of his words. I had spent most of my life giving, years of raising Samuel, years of trying to make up for what I could not give Lena. My sacrifices had shaped me, but they had also trapped me. I realized that guilt had guided so many of my decisions, pushing me to accept treatment that diminished me. Samuel's presence, steady and sincere, showed me what connection without conditions felt like. He offered long-term support, a stable home, and a role at his medical practice where I could bring warmth to families facing uncertainty. He made it clear that this was not charity. It was his way of honoring the care I had given him when he had needed it most. The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to look away. Accepting help felt both like opening a door and letting go of a burden I had carried so long it felt natural. But the fear of dependency lingered. I wondered if taking this step meant abandoning hope for reconciliation with Lena. I wondered if I deserved comfort after a life of survival. The questions pulled at me, demanding an answer. Then I remembered the cold nights in my car. I remembered the locked door, the harsh words, the sense of dissolving into nothing. I also remembered Samuel's arms around me, the warmth of his presence, the unwavering loyalty he had carried from childhood into adulthood. I realized the choice was not about choosing between them. It was about choosing myself. I told Samuel I would accept his help, not because I was desperate, but because it was time to build a life that honored my worth. His relief showed in the quiet exhale he released. Later, as I stood at the window overlooking the glowing city, I felt the first shift inside me. A quiet certainty, a beginning shaped not by guilt but by hope. The skyline shimmered like scattered pieces of something waiting to be rebuilt, and for the first time in decades, I believed that I could rebuild too. If you are still watching and the turning point shook you, comment number 6 below so I know you are walking through the fire with me. Now let us move on to chapter 7, where consequences come to the surface. Morning light slid across the floor of Samuel's penthouse with a softer, almost hesitant glow, as if unsure how to illuminate the emotional wreckage left behind. I woke with a rested body but a mind still tender from everything that had unfolded. The quiet around me felt heavier than silence should. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, breathing slowly, wondering what the day would bring and what had already happened to Lena and Eric after the confrontation. Samuel was on a call when I stepped into the living area, his expression calm but focused. When he ended the conversation, he explained that his investigator had already gathered updates. The video of the confrontation had circulated quickly in neighborhood groups and local social media pages. Comments accused Lena and Eric of cruelty and neglect. I felt something sharp twist inside me, a blend of grim justice and maternal sorrow I could not separate. More updates followed. Lena's small baking business had been flooded with negative reviews. Some referenced the confrontation, others the post she had made belittling me. The investigator also reported that Eric had been called to a meeting by his employer, who questioned whether his public behavior reflected poorly on their company. Even their children were now facing awkward looks and whispers from classmates' parents. Hearing all of it made my chest tighten. It was never my wish for any child to feel the consequences of an adult's choices. When I checked my phone, dozens of messages waited. Some were frantic, describing vandalism on their front door or neighbors refusing to speak to them. Others were softer, attempts at apology that wavered between guilt and desperation. I read them all without knowing whether to respond. The words blurred together, each one a reminder of the tangled web between us. Samuel saw the conflict in my expression and reminded me gently that consequences are not punishments. They are simply the results of choices. He told me I had no obligation to shield them from the effects of their actions, especially when those actions had nearly broken me. I spent the next hour sitting by the window, watching the city spread out below. I thought about motherhood, how it stretches and bends until it feels like part of your skin. Thought about the years I had spent absorbing guilt that did not belong to me. My love for Lena was real, but so was the harm we had both endured. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge that both truths could coexist. Later, the investigator shared an anonymous message circulating online accusing Lena of elderly neglect. The tone suggested it came from someone who had known us, perhaps a neighbor. Even though the message defended me, it added another layer of pressure to a situation already spiraling. I felt myself sink under the weight of it all. To ease the heaviness, Samuel took me to see the building where my future apartment would be. The open hallways, the warm light, the quiet balconies overlooking a small park. They gave me a sense of peace I had not felt in years. I could imagine myself planting herbs, cooking my own meals, creating routines that belonged solely to me. The vision steadied my heart. But the guilt lingered. On the ride back, tears slid quietly down my face as I realized that letting consequences unfold did not erase the pain. It simply exposed what had always been broken. I mourned the mother I could not be, and the daughter I could not reach. Back in the penthouse, I sat alone with a cup of tea. The warmth in my hands grounded me. I accepted that this moment, painful as it was, could not be undone. It was necessary, and beneath the grief, something small but steady began to take shape, a strength I had not known I possessed. Morning came quietly, slipping into the penthouse without urgency. I woke feeling hollowed out but lighter, as if the storm inside me had finally exhausted itself. The grief was still there, but its edges were softer, less jagged. I lay still for a few minutes, absorbing the unfamiliar sense of clarity that followed a night of tears. For the first time in weeks, my mind did not race toward what Lena might say or do. Instead, it settled on a simple truth. My healing could not depend on her reactions anymore. Samuel checked on me before leaving for a long day of surgeries. His presence steadied me. He reminded me that choosing distance was not cruelty, it was protection. When he left, the silence of the penthouse felt different than before, less oppressive, more spacious. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, letting my thoughts unfold. I realized how much of my life had been spent shaping myself around other people's needs, shrinking parts of myself to cause less trouble, apologizing for things I never meant. I took out a notebook Samuel had placed in the room and began writing. I listed small steps I could take toward independence, finding daily routines, rebuilding my finances, keeping emotional boundaries. It felt strange to consider my own desires without guilt whispering over my shoulder. Even the act of writing them made something loosen inside me. Later, Samuel arranged for someone to take me to the building where my future apartment was being prepared. The progress surprised me. Fresh paint brightened the hallway, and sunlight spilled across the new flooring. I walked through the space slowly, imagining furniture, imagining mornings watering herbs on the balcony, imagining a life that belonged to me. A staff member handed me a small box found during the salvage of my old building. Inside was a simple ceramic plant pot, chipped at the rim but intact. Holding it brought a rush of emotion. Something from my past had survived with me. The day continued gently. I visited the clinic where Samuel worked, observing families in the waiting area. I saw how tense they were, how relieved they seemed when greeted with a warm voice. I could almost see a place for myself there, offering comfort in a way that felt purposeful. The idea settled quietly, fitting into a space in my heart I had forgotten existed. In the evening, messages from Lena continued. Apologies, fears, confusion. I read them all with compassion but resisted the pull to respond. Space was not abandonment. It was necessary. When Samuel returned, I shared my small victories. He listened with pride, reminding me that each step belonged to me alone. That night, I placed the rescued plant pot on a shelf in the penthouse. Then I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window as the city lights flickered awake. For the first time in a very long while, I felt myself moving, not away from someone, but toward the life I finally allowed myself to imagine. If you are still watching and the journey is pulling you deeper, comment number 8 below so I know you are still here. Now let us head toward the final chapters, where everything finds its place. A few quiet days passed. each one steadier than the last. When the morning came to move into my new apartment, I felt a flutter of disbelief mixed with a soft, trembling excitement. The movers carried in the few belongings I had gathered, and the building staff finished their final checks. I packed everything from the penthouse into one small bag, feeling strangely weightless as I prepared to begin again. The new building was calm and sunlit, its hallways clean and warm in a way that loosened something inside me. When I stepped into the apartment, the light spilled across the floor as though it had been waiting for me. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the smooth kitchen counter, running my fingers along the windowsill, pausing in the doorway of the bedroom. Every corner felt like a promise that life could still expand gently after contracting so painfully. Samuel arrived a short while later with a small collection of thoughtful gifts, a set of fresh herbs for the balcony, a lamp with a soft glow, and towels that smelled faintly of lavender. He stayed mostly in the background, letting me take ownership of the space. His presence was comforting without overshadowing the moment. He reminded me that the apartment was mine. No debts, no obligations, only a foundation for my independence. I placed the rescued plant pot on the balcony, the chipped rim facing outward like a quiet reminder of where I had come from. Inside, I arranged a few photographs on a shelf and organized the kitchen carefully, finding calm in the familiar rhythm of placing items where they belonged. Messages from Lena arrived throughout the afternoon, apologies tangled with fear, confusion, and frustration. I read them all without letting the rush of emotion pull me back into old patterns. When I finally responded, it was with a single calm message asking for time and assuring her that I was safe. As evening settled, I stepped onto the balcony, the city breathing below me. For the first time in many years, I felt entirely at home, not just in a place, but in myself. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, the early evening breeze brushing gently across my face. Below me, Chicago hummed with the familiar pulse of traffic and distant chatter. A year ago, that same city had felt enormous, uncaring, and cold. Now it felt like a place I had finally learned to inhabit on my own terms. The light from the setting sun washed the buildings in gold, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely present in my own life. As I leaned on the railing, memories drifted back one by one. The night I slept in my car, shivering in the dark, the sting of hearing my own daughter call me useless, the overwhelming sense of falling apart with no one to turn to. Those moments were still sharp, but no longer unbearable. They had softened into reminders of a woman I used to be, a woman who did not yet understand her own worth. Pain had shaped me, yes, but it no longer controlled me. I thought about Samuel and how unexpected his presence had been. The little boy I once carried on my hip had returned as a man capable of lifting me out of the ruins of my life. He did not rescue me out of obligation. He rescued me because love, when given freely in the past, often finds its way back in surprising forms. Family, I realized, is not a fixed concept. Sometimes it grows in places where duty does not exist, but genuine affection does. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of herbs from the balcony garden. My plants thrived here, just as I did. I had grown into someone who could set boundaries, who could forgive without surrendering herself, who could let go of the need to be understood by those who chose not to understand her. I learned that forgiveness is not something one gives for others, but something one gives to unburden oneself. Before closing the balcony door, I looked out once more at the vibrant city lights. Everything that had happened led me to this moment, to this calm, centered version of myself. I had not lost a family. I had found the one that was truly meant for me. And as I sat down with a cup of warm tea, I felt certain of one thing. This was not an ending, but the beginning of the life I had always deserved. In the end, every journey of loss becomes a journey of returning to oneself. Life has a way of stripping us down, not to break us, but to reveal what was unshakable all along. Pain teaches clarity. Silence teaches strength. And the moments that feel like endings often open the door to a new beginning we never imagined. What matters is not who failed to stand beside us, but who reminded us that we were worthy of standing at all. Healing is not loud. It is steady, patient, and deeply personal. And when it arrives, it teaches us that dignity is not given by others. It is claimed by choosing ourselves again and again. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment, follow the page, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter.